At 25,000 feet above Nazi Germany, the sky was hauntingly silent. The sun hung pale and distant, and every breath Jack Reynolds took through his oxygen mask stung with frost. His fingers were stiff around the control stick. The metal shell of the cockpit groaned under pressure, and tiny ice crystals drifted through the canopy like snowflakes suspended in time. Behind him, a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 closed in quickly, its bulky frame building just enough speed to be dangerous. Jack jerked the stick back and climbed higher. Thinner air, deadlier heights. Most American fighters would have sputtered and stalled at this altitude. The air was too thin, the engines overheated, and the cooling systems couldn't cope. But not this one. Jack's P-51 Mustang surged ahead as if it had come alive. The Merlin engine beneath the cowling hummed instead of strained, slicing past 25,000 feet without faltering. Jack didn't yet understand why, but he could feel it. This aircraft was different. It held together where others failed. The German pilot tried to follow. He pulled up after Jack, but his aircraft shuddered, stalled, and dropped helplessly into the blue void. Jack let out a short, disbelieving laugh, his heart hammering beneath the mask. This wasn't standard. This Mustang didn't behave like the rest. It wasn't in the manual. The airframe looked identical, the engine markings the same, but somewhere something had changed. What Jack didn't know, what no one in the sky could have guessed, was that this advantage had begun far below, not in a laboratory or a design office, but in a freezing hangar in East Anglia, England, where an American mechanic made a choice that defied orders, broke every rule, and may have saved Jack's life. This is the real story of how one man's unapproved modification transformed the most critical fighter of World War II, and how a single act of defiance helped America seize the skies over Europe. The illusion of perfection. In 1942, U.S. military leaders were selling an ideal. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just another aircraft. It was the future. Sleek, powerful, long-ranged, and paired with the legendary British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it was hailed as the ultimate answer to Germany's Luftwaffe. Official reports called it flawless. Training manuals praised its engineering. Public speeches overflowed with words like revolutionary and invincible. It was supposed to be everything an American pilot needed to rule the air. But on the frozen, mud-soaked airfields of East Anglia, perfection vanished fast. The Mustang looked great on paper. It performed beautifully at low altitude in warm weather and in test flights. But in real combat, at 20,000 feet and higher, in freezing air and under combat stress, pilots and mechanics began noticing a harsh truth. The aircraft had a hidden flaw. The cooling system was its Achilles heel. The belly-mounted scoop under the fuselage was meant to solve the issue, drawing in high-pressure air to cool the radiator so the engine could sustain maximum power. Engineers had even theorized that the airflow could generate thrust, a concept known as the Meredith effect. But in practice, the system was fragile. If airflow wasn't perfect, temperatures spiked dangerously. Pilots began reporting overheats during steep climbs. Coolant froze in winter before the engine even warmed. A single leak could mean the engine seized or burst into flames. But the official command was clear. No modifications. No questions, follow protocol. That didn't sit right with a 33-year-old staff sergeant from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Melvin Tex Harper. A lean, soft-spoken mechanic with hands like iron vices and a brain wired for machines, Tex had spent his pre-war weekends tuning flathead Fords and racing friends down dusty farm roads. Rules didn't matter much to him. Results did. Stationed with a fighter group near Cambridge, Tex and his team battled frost, wind, and exhaustion, keeping Mustangs flying. Yet one thing kept gnawing at him: the sound, that hollow metallic groan when the engines climbed too hard, too fast. Then came the breakdowns, overheating, cracked radiators, engines that burned out mid-flight. Too many pilots weren't coming home. He read every manual, studied every chart. Then, one frozen night in December, after another limping Mustang rolled back to base, Tex crouched beneath the fuselage with a flashlight and stared at the belly scoop. He started asking dangerous questions. What if the scoop's shape was wrong? What if airflow didn't compress properly? Could reshaping the duct make the radiator run cooler, cleaner, more efficient? Officially, he was supposed to file a report and wait for engineers back home. But after losing two close friends that week, Tex had enough. The next morning, armed with scrap aluminum, a torch, and pure mechanical instinct, he broke every rule in the book. He didn't ask permission. He didn't write it down. He just started working. And in doing so, he sparked a quiet revolution that began not with command orders, but with greasy hands in a cold English hangar. Tex didn't just see a problem. He felt it. In the charts, in the vibration of the airframe, in the whine of the engine when it gasped for air. So, instead of waiting for bureaucrats, he grabbed his tools, a hacksaw, a rivet gun, and his hard-earned intuition. He stripped away the lower access panel beneath the belly scoop of one P-51. Inside was the radiator duct, designed to channel air through the system and out the rear, creating a pressurized tunnel. It looked fine on paper, but to Tex, it was wrong. Sharp corners, poorly aligned joints, rough edges. The duct disrupted airflow instead of guiding it. So he got creative. Using thin aluminum from a damaged wing, he crafted smooth internal vanes, angled plates that gently narrowed the passage, compressing air before it hit the radiator. He polished and riveted them into place, sealed gaps, and reduced turbulence. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't log it. He just made it work. He didn't even mention it to the pilot scheduled to fly the aircraft the next morning, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds. Jack was one of the younger pilots in the squadron, brave, sharp, and just cocky enough to push a Mustang to its limits. When he climbed into that plane the next day, he didn't know anything had changed. But 30 minutes into his high-altitude patrol, he radioed back with a strange report. Birds climbing smoother than ever, temps holding steady. "Is this a new engine?" Tex didn't answer. He just smiled. By the end of that first flight, the results were obvious. Engine temperature at 25,000 FT, down by 15 degree F. Acceleration in climb noticeably improved. Jack said the plane felt tighter, more alive. He didn't know why, but he liked it. Tex didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, he applied his Mod TOW 6 more Mustangs. Each one got a custom-fitted duct system, tweaked slightly, based on what he learned from the last. He refined the angles, reduced drag, and tested different sealing methods using parachute cloth and adhesive resin. The impact was undeniable. Planes that received the Tex mod climbed faster, stayed cooler, and returned from missions with fewer mechanical issues. Pilots began requesting the hot ones, Texas planes. They started calling the tweaks Harper's hacks. Unofficially, the squadron commander gave him the green light. Officially, nothing had happened. There was no paperwork, no authorization, just results. Other maintenance crews noticed. Tex started getting quiet questions from neighboring squadrons. "Hey, mind showing us what you're doing with your scoops?" Mechanics began sneaking into his hangar at night to measure duct dangles and sketch the design on cigarette packs. The mod spread like wildfire, and no one dared report it. After all, the pilots flying these machines had a simple motto. Anything that brought them home alive was worth keeping quiet. Tex knew he was walking a fine line. He wasn't just altering military hardware. He was doing it during wartime without approval. If someone in command found out, he could be demoted, court-martialed, or worse. But then again, it wasn't about rules for him. It was about survival. The turning point came in mid-February. One of the base's best pilots, Captain Roy Red Lansing, flew a mission deep into occupied France in one of Texas's modified Mustangs. During the flight, Red was ambushed by 3 Fall Wolf 190 fighters. He fought them off for 10 full minutes, outclimbed one, outd another, and managed to limp-foam with engine temps running stable the entire time. After landing, Red walked straight into the hangar, looked Tex in the eye, and said, "You saved my life up there. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Word reached higher up the chain within days, not through formal channels, but through whispers, combat reports, and pilot debriefs. Suddenly, senior officers started asking questions. Why are your planes lasting longer? Why are your engines running cooler than spec? Why are pilots requesting the same 6 tail numbers every mission? Tex knew it was only a matter of time before someone came down to investigate. But by then, his little rebellion had become a quiet revolution. The Mustang evolves. What began as an unsanctioned tweak to a single Mustang had now taken on a life of its own. Within weeks, Tex Harper's cooling modification wasn't just a rumor. It was a movement. Across the base, other mechanics started replicating his work, adjusting their own radiator ducts, comparing airflow results, and swapping stories over lukewarm coffee in drafty hangars. But it wasn't just talk. The numbers began to show something hard and undeniable. First, the engine temperatures. Pilots flying modified P-51s reported a consistent drop in high-altitude engine temperature, 15 to 17 degrees F, lower than standard configurations. This might not sound dramatic on paper, but in the thin air above 25,000 ft, that margin was the difference between pushing your aircraft to its limits or throttling back to avoid an engine fire. Second, time to climb. With better airflow and reduced drag through the radiator duct, the Mustangs reached combat altitude faster, up to 12% faster, depending on loadout and weather. That meant pilots could get above their German adversaries more quickly, giving them the holy grail of air combat, the altitude advantage. Third, and perhaps most important of all, was survivability. In one squadron alone, the kill-to-loss ratio for Tex modified aircraft jumped to more than 3.1 over a period of 6 weeks. The pilots flying them weren't different. The guns hadn't changed. The fuel was the same. The only difference was a reshaped airflow duct, and the man who dared to cut it open. Soon, word spread beyond Texas' original unit. Mechanics at neighboring airfields across East Anglia started writing letters home, asking for thin aluminum sheets, smoother tools, even homemade sealants to mimic the improvements. Some even pulled parts off grounded aircraft just to copy the internal veins. Unofficial blueprints began circulating on napkins, notepads, and even pages torn from aircraft maintenance logs. There was no central design. Each mechanic brought their own flair to the concept, but they all owed the spark to Tex Harper and his original rule-breaking experiment. Still, the top brass hadn't formally acknowledged anything. Commanders higher up were aware something was happening, but with kill ratios improving and mission success rates climbing, no one was eager to dig too deep. As long as the planes kept flying and the pilots kept coming home, any potential violations were quietly ignored. That is, until a visiting colonel from the 8th Air Force Command stopped by the base for an inspection. He was doing a routine walkthrough of maintenance operations when he spotted the belly scoop on one P-51. It had been opened up for a coolant line check, and inside he noticed the non-standard ductwork. Angled metal vanes, polished smooth, clearly not part of any authorized blueprint. His face turned red. Within minutes, he was demanding answers. Who authorized this modification? Where were the engineering documents? Why hadn't North American Aviation, the aircraft's manufacturer, been consulted? Tex was called in. He didn't lie. He explained simply and clearly what he had changed and why. He showed temperature logs, climb rate comparisons, and combat reports. Other mechanics backed him up. Pilots, some of them seasoned aces, lined up to speak on his behalf. One of them was Captain Red Lansing. Standing in front of the colonel, he delivered one sentence that cut through the noise. "Sir, you can fly it cold or die hot. That's the choice." The colonel didn't reply, not directly, but he made a call that evening. 2 days later, engineers from North American Aviation arrived on base carrying blueprints, testing equipment, and a list of questions. They spent a week examining Texas modifications. They ran airflow tests, took detailed photographs, and even installed pressure sensors inside one of the modified ducts. And when the data came back, the verdict was clear. Tex Harper's design didn't just work. It was brilliant. The internal vanes helped stabilize airflow, reduce turbulence, and increase the pressure across the radiator core. That improved heat dissipation and allowed the Meredith effect to kick in under combat conditions, delivering a small but measurable thrust gain. Exactly what the original designers had hoped for, but failed to achieve under lab conditions. In short, Tex had done in a freezing hangar what a team of engineers hadn't been able to pull off in 2 years of development. The recommendation came swiftly. North American began reviewing the changes for incorporation into the next production batch of P-51s, the variant, which would become the most famous model of the war. As for Tex, he wasn't reprimanded. He was promoted to technical sergeant and later given a field combination for innovation under combat conditions. But Tex didn't care about rank. What mattered to him were the pilots. The fact that more of them were coming back now because of something he built with scrap metal and instinct, that was enough. And the pilots, they knew who to thank. One of them carved it into the access panel of his Mustang with a pocket knife for Tex, who made her breathe. When brass found out by the spring of 1944, Tex Harper's once secret duck modification was an open secret across East Anglia. Dozens of P-51 Mustangs now carried the internal vane system. Pilots were flying higher, fighting longer, and returning with fewer overheating problems. But that kind of success doesn't stay in the shadows for long. When the visiting colonel from the 8th Air Force Command spotted the unauthorized ductwork during his inspection, his reaction was swift and furious. Military aircraft weren't supposed to be modified in the field, especially not structural components like a cooling system. The rules were there for Aviation to ensure consistency, safety, and accountability. Within hours, a stop work order was issued. All aircraft with modified cooling ducts were to be grounded for review. No further changes were to be made without written engineering approval. To Tex, it was more than a slap in the face. It was a potential death sentence for the pilots. One aircraft had already been prepped for a long-range escort mission to Berlin. The pilot, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, was scheduled to fly it the next morning. When he was told his aircraft was grounded, he stormed into the maintenance tent. "You're telling me I have to fly a stock bird?" he asked. "Orders from upstairs," someone muttered. Jack looked at Tex. "Tell me this is a mistake." Tex didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, a quiet tension settled over the hangars. Mechanics whispered about what might happen next. Some feared Tex would be court-martialed. Others assumed the whole squadron would be punished. But then something unexpected happened. The pilots pushed back. It started with Captain Red Lansing. He walked into the command office, still in flight gear, and made his case directly to the squadron leader. He didn't raise his voice. He just told the truth. "Sir, I don't care what's written in the tech manual. Those modified planes keep us alive. You put me in a stock model, and I'm a sitting duck above 20,000 Hatters after more pilots followed. In ones and twos, they gave quiet but firm testimonies. They weren't engineers. They didn't understand airflow ratios or radiator efficiency, but they knew results. And the results said Texas design worked. The squadron leader, under growing pressure, sent a formal request to delay the grounding until the aircraft could be evaluated properly. The brass reluctantly agreed, but only if North American Aviation could send their engineers to inspect the modifications firsthand. So they did. Within days, 2 senior engineers arrived at the base. Men in wool coats and horn-rimmed glasses, clearly unused to the mud noise and urgency of a frontline airfield. They examined Texas-modified Mustangs carefully, taking measurements, asking questions, and comparing them with factory specifications. At first they said very little, but once they ran wind tunnel simulations and pressure tests using their field instruments. The silence broke. "This is effective," one of them finally admitted. "Very effective." They confirmed what techs and the pilots had been saying for weeks. His reshaped duct created smoother airflow, higher internal pressure, and better heat dissipation. It wasn't a fluke. It was sound engineering, even if it hadn't come from a drafting table. The engineers didn't stop at approval. They took detailed notes and sent them back to California, where North American began adapting the concept for future production models. And just like that, the confrontation ended. Not in punishment, but in progress. Tex was called into the squadron office. The same colonel who'd once threatened to ground the planes handed him a typed letter. It was a combination for field innovation. It came with a promotion, and more importantly, official recognition that his modification had saved lives. Tex didn't say much. He just nodded, tucked the lettermayer into his breast pocket, and went back to the hangar because there were still more planes to fix and more pilots to protect, from rogue fix to official doctrine. By late March of 1944, what had started as one man's quiet act of defiance had now been legitimized. North American aviation engineers didn't just validate Tex Harper's design, they embraced it. Back at their facilities in California, they began drafting formal revisions for the P-51's radiator duct system. The technical name for it would appear in memos and blueprints as an internal airflow smoothing and compression retrofit. But among the pilots and mechanics who lived through the change, it had only one name: Tex's Fix. And with the upcoming release of the P-51D variant, the most famous and widely used version of the Mustang, his ideas became permanent. New Mustangs rolled off the production lines with optimized duct shapes, smoother flow paths, and subtle design tweaks inspired by Tex's scrap metal prototype. What the engineers in suits had once theorized, a mechanic in coveralls had proven in war. This was the twist no one expected. War. This was the twist no one expected. A mechanic with no formal degree, no engineering title, and no clearance to innovate had not only solved a high-altitude performance issue, he had helped reshape the most effective fighter aircraft of the Second World War. The Mustang's ability to escort bombers deep into Germany without overheating, to climb higher and faster than nearly any other propeller-driven plane in the war, and to survive grueling dogfights above the clouds, all of it had been enhanced by a change that wasn't even supposed to exist. Pilots noticed the shift immediately. The new Mustangs felt tighter, cleaner in the climb, more responsive in high-altitude turns. Engine temperatures remained stable even under extended boost. In combat, that meant fewer aborted missions, fewer emergency landings, and a greater margin for survival. By the time the Normandy invasion approached in June of 1944, Mustang squadrons across England were flying almost exclusively with aircraft that included the revised cooling design. The fix that had been grounded was now gospel text, never bragged about any of this. He didn't give interviews. He didn't write reports. His name never appeared on the blueprints. But among the crews, he became a quiet legend. Not because he wanted fame, but because he had done what needed to be done, and he did it right. There's a story told by one of the younger mechanics who worked under Tex in those months. He said that after the first P-51D arrived on base with the new duct already factory installed, Tex walked around at once, crouched down, ran his hand along the inner curve of the scoop, and nodded. Then he said only 2 words. They got it. For Tex, that was enough. It wasn't about getting credit. It was about seeing that the idea, born of necessity, instinct, and a little rule-breaking, had finally found its rightful place in the war effort. And for the pilots, the message was even simpler. They didn't care where the fix came from. They just knew their Mustangs ran cooler, flew better, and brought them home more often than before. That twist from rogue fix to official doctrine was a rare moment in military history. A reminder that sometimes the front lines of innovation aren't found in boardrooms or labs, but in frozen hangars under leaking engines, in the hands of men who trust what they feel more than what they're told. The battle over Berlin. March 6, 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force launched its boldest daylight bombing mission yet, Berlin. It was the heart of the Reich, the center of Nazi power, industry, and propaganda. The Germans had prepared for this. They knew it was coming, and they were ready to throw everything they had into the sky to stop it. Hundreds of American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators took off from bases across England. Their target, the industrial and military facilities ringing the German capital. Their protection, squadrons of P-51 Mustangs flying high and fast as fighter escort. For weeks leading up to this moment, Tex Harper's modified Mustangs and now their factory-born successors had been showing their worth. But no test was greater than the airspace above Berlin. It was the most heavily defended air corridor in Europe. The Luftwaffe had stationed their best squadrons along the route. Experienced pilots, aggressive tactics, and swarms of fighters, primarily Focke-Wulf 190s and Messid Bf 109. The early hours of the mission were eerily quiet. The bombers droned eastward in tight formation, silhouetted against a cold blue sky. But just west of the German capital, the Luftwaffe struck. German radar picked up the American force, and fighters scrambled in waves. The plan was simple. Hit the bombers hard and fast before they could reach Berlin, and do it above 25,000 FIT, where the cold would engines and test nerves. But this time, the Mustangs didn't fall behind. They didn't lag, didn't overheat, didn't break formation. They stayed up, and they hit back. In the chaos that followed, dozens of dogfights broke out across the sky. Mustang pilots dove and climbed with precision, executing tight turns and slashing attacks that tore into German formations. They no longer had to worry about managing engine temps during combat. They could stay in the fight longer, and with that came a newfound aggressiveness. Captain Red Lansing, flying one of Texas' early field-modified Mustangs, reportedly scored 3 kills that day, 1 Messerschmitt and 2 Focke-Wulfs taken down in a 10-minute stretch near Potsdam. In a debriefing later, he said, "The engine didn't even flinch. I was climbing at 30,000 FT and still had power left. They tried to outclimb me and they couldn't." Other pilots reported the same. One group credited the cooling system improvements for allowing extended high-power climbs that would have been impossible just months earlier. No overheating, no boil-off, just raw, reliable power. By mission's end, 69 German aircraft had been confirmed destroyed. Many more were damaged. The Luftwaffe had taken a hit it would not recover from easily. And most remarkable of all, nearly every American bomber returned safely. The Berlin raid didn't just instill fear in the heart of the Reich. It proved that the United States now commanded the skies, even over Europe's most heavily defended city. And while newspapers back home celebrated the bravery of the pilots and the accuracy of the bombers, few understood what had truly made that mission possible. It wasn't only the Merlin engine, or the fuel capacity, or the training of the crews. It was airflow. It was cooling. It was the ability to fight at 30,000 feet without your machine betraying you. And for that, credit belonged to a man who never flew. A man who worked in the cold, with oil on his hands, and whose name was barely recorded, Tex Harper. That day over Berlin marked a turning point, not just in the war, but in the evolution of aerial combat. Speed and firepower were no longer enough. You needed endurance. You needed altitude. You needed an advantage. And because of Tex, the P-51 Mustang had one. What Tex left behind. After Berlin, the air war transformed. The Mustang, already respected, became feared. German pilots could identify its outline instantly, and dreaded it. The P-51 wasn't merely a fast escort anymore. It was a hunter, a high-altitude predator that could fly farther, climb quicker, and fight longer than anything the Luftwaffe could launch against it. And the secret behind that transformation didn't come from a strategy meeting or a design bureau. It came from a mechanic with a hacksaw and a freezing hangar, who refused to accept good enough. Tex Harper never appeared in headlines. He never sat for interviews or claimed recognition. After the war, he returned home to Oklahoma and opened a small engine repair shop. Most who came through his doors never knew he had once helped shape the skies over Europe. But his legacy didn't end in 1945. The principles behind his cooling modification, the real-world application of the Meredith effect, became a cornerstone of post-war aircraft design. Engineers studying jet propulsion borrowed insights from Tex's battlefield innovation. The concept that a cooling system could contribute to thrust, not merely manage heat, carried forward into the jet age. By the time of the Korean War, American aircraft like the F-86 Sabre benefited from refined airflow engineering that traced its lineage, in part to what Tex had proven in the field. Even today, modern stealth fighters, with their controlled heat signatures and internal ducting, owe a quiet debt to the work done under the fuselage of a P-51 Mustang in 1944. Yet, perhaps, Tex's most lasting legacy isn't found in blueprints or museums. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, stands a restored P-51 Mustang painted in the colors of the 8th Air Force. Its polished aluminum skin gleams under the lights. Invasion stripes stretch across its wings. Beneath the cockpit, the name Lucky Lady is stenciled in black. But if you kneel down, low, near the edge of the radiator scoop, you'll find something most visitors miss. 3 small words etched in careful letters. For Tex, who made her breathe. No ceremony, no statue, just a quiet tribute from one generation of airmen to the man who kept them alive. That's the kind of remembrance that outlasts medals. They say history is written by victors, but sometimes the most important lines are written in grease instead of ink, in silence instead of speeches. Tex Harper never fired a weapon in battle. He never pulled G-forces in a dogfight or leapt from a burning aircraft. Yet without him, countless pilots might never have made it home. He defied orders. He broke procedure. And by doing so, he saved lives. Not through force, but through focus. Not through command, but through understanding. He saw a problem, and instead of waiting, he solved it. That wasn't just engineering, it was courage. Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, the pilot from the start of this story, gave an interview years later. His hair was white by then, his voice soft. When asked who his hero was, he didn't name a general or another pilot. He said this, "People talk about aces, but the man who saved my life wore oil-stained coveralls and never left the ground. I don't even know if I ever saw his face, but I remember that engine holding together when I needed it most. He gave me altitude, and that gave me a chance to come home." There are thousands of stories like that from the war. Stories untold, nearly forgotten. They remind us that victory isn't just about firepower or bravery in the air. It's also about people like Tex, the ones who work in silence, who fix what's broken, who make things better. Not for glory, but because it's right. Not all heroes fly. Some kneel beneath a Mustang in the freezing dark, shaping aluminum with trembling hands, thinking about the pilot who will take off tomorrow. And thanks to Tex Harper, that pilot had a better chance of coming home.